Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the swarming, smoky heart of Tenochtitlán, yes. That ancient floating city, where canals outnumber streets, corn is basically currency, and the air smells like incense, wet dogs, and chili pepper anxiety. You've just blinked awake on a market day, and surprise, you're not a noble, a priest, or a jaguar warrior. You're you, in a loincloth, inside a reed-walled room with no lock, no mattress, and definitely no toothbrush. The good news, you're alive in the largest city in the Americas in the 15th century. The bad news, you're about to attempt one full day in an Aztec market square without getting scammed, stabbed, or accidentally offered as a blood sacrifice. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Bonus points if you're in bed already. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir beneath a thin, woven mat, the kind that sticks to your sweaty skin and leaves delightful imprint patterns all over your back. It's dawn in Tenochtitlan, which means you've overslept. Most people have already left to set up stalls, deliver fish, or sweep temple steps. Your room, if we can generously call it, that is a mud-plastered cube with no door, no furniture, and no privacy, just a gourd filled with stale water, some ashes and a clay brazier, and a spider the size of a fig politely claiming the corner. Outside, drums are beating, not war drums yet, just the daily rhythm that pulses through this city like caffeine. You stumble upright, bang your head on a low ceiling beam, and quickly discover that reed walls do not block sound. Your neighbors are already arguing about maize prices and whether someone's chili paste got diluted again. You squint through the cracks in the wall on the canal. A canoe glides past, filled with squawking turkeys. The lake water sparkles like it's mocking you. It knows your day is about to go terribly. Tenochtitlan is not a city for sleepwalkers. It's a living engine, powered by trade, tribute, and the occasional minor human sacrifice. The markets aren't just busy, they're legendary. Spanish conquistadors later described the central marketplace of Tlatelolco as being the size of 10 football fields and hosting up to 60,000 people on feast days. That's not a market. That's a stampede with stalls. And guess what? You're expected to go. You've got to bring something to sell or trade. Navigate a barter economy that includes cacao beans, feathers, and embroidered cloaks. And not die of embarrassment when you forget what 5 beans equals. Spoiler, it's not a tamale. Not unless it's Tuesday and the vendor likes you, your body. Meanwhile, is already regretting the decision to be vertical. You're 25 but feel 63. Your knees ache from sleeping on packed dirt. Your ribs are sore from lying on a stone pestle someone left under the mat. And your feet are already filthy because no floors. Oh, and the bathhouse. You'll earn that luxury after you survive the day. But don't worry, the Aztecs are big on order. There are laws, market inspectors, feathered guards with obsidian clubs. It's all incredibly organized and terrifying. So what's the plan? Get up, try to look like you know what you're doing. Grab your bundle of woven grass mats, or chili peppers, or whatever it is you're supposed to trade. And don't forget your cacao beans, unless you want to trade your sandals for breakfast. Historians still argue whether Tenochtitlan functioned more like a capitalist metropolis or a tribute-fed theocracy with excellent PR. But one thing's clear. You're not ready. You're not equipped. And you're already sweating. Good luck out there. You step outside and instantly regret it. The sun isn't even at full throttle yet. But the humidity hugs you like a desperate ex. The packed earth pathway between homes is already a gridlocked shuffle of basket-carrying traders, toddlers with snot-streaked faces, and dogs that may or may not have jobs, yes. Some dogs are messengers, no. You can't pet them. Your feet slap into soft mud yesterday's canal overflow? Maybe. Or someone's informal latrine experiment? You decide not to ask. You're wearing your only tunic, which smells like old corn dough and defeat, and your feet are bare. The Aztecs believed in practicality, and footwear was for warriors and merchants who mattered. Spoiler, you are neither. The city smells like smoked peppers, wet stone, and a faint undertone of, oh no. You pass a group of women grinding maize on metidits, their arms strong, their eyes judgmental. You pretend you're late to something important. You're not. You're just trying not to die of social anxiety in the 1400s. Housing in Tenochtitlán is enthusiastic. Everything is wedged tightly together. Your sleeping hut is built of adobe bricks or woven reeds. Depending on your wealth level, read low. There are no windows. Airflow is a rumor. Your sleeping mat is a flattened tangle of woven fiber, and your pillow is whatever your arm was doing last night. Oh, and privacy. That's for nobles. Maybe. Your wall is shared with someone who coughs like a haunted duck. You know this because they did it all night. The entire street shares a water jar, 3 gossipy ants, and at least 1 jealous turkey. You'd think you'd get used to this by now. But waking up in Tenochtitlán is an attack on all 5 senses, and your 6th, which screams, run. Unfortunately, you need to eat. So you drag your aching body toward the market, carrying a bundle of dried flowers and woven trinkets that someone told you were totally tradable. You're about to find out how much they lied. The market square looms like a living organism. Tlatelolco, the biggest of the city's markets, is a feast of chaos. Tents flap in the wind. Smoke curls from portable braziers. People shout prices in Nahuatl, argue over fish freshness, and haggle like their lives depend on it, which, in some cases, they do. You enter and are immediately overwhelmed. There are rows for everything: salt, chili, live animals, medicinal herbs, obsidian blades. In the deeply suspicious miscellaneous goods zone, someone offers you a roasted lizard. Someone else offers you a second-hand loincloth. You decline both with a polite grunt. Suddenly, someone shouts. A market judge in feathered headdress is berating a vendor for trying to pass off week-old amaranth cakes as fresh. You try not to stare. Aztec justice is swift, public, and occasionally involves being clubbed in front of your stall. You shuffle toward the textile section, trying to look like someone who definitely belongs here. That strategy fails instantly. A boy selling frogs offers to help you not get robbed. You decline. He follows you anyway. Your feet ache. Your lower back is staging a revolution. The market is a maze of bargaining and barter, and you are already several beans poorer and 1 clay whistle richer. The whistle is shaped like a screaming skull. Totally useless. You're starting to understand why the boy followed you. Historians still debate how socially mobile the average Aztec commoner could be. One school of thought claims trade allowed even low-status citizens a path to prosperity. Another points out that all of those traders still paid taxes, and some of them paid with limbs. You, however, are simply trying not to pass out from the smell of a fermented maize beer pulque that someone just spilled near your toes. You finally find a small, clear patch of ground 3 tiles wide, 1 tile long, and lay out your mats. A woman next to you is selling intricately dyed feathers. Yours look like someone sat on them. She smiles politely. You contemplate crying. But then a potential buyer stops, sniffs your flowers, and miracle of miracles hands you 3 cacao beans, which is great. Except you now owe that frog-selling boy 2 beans for protection. You pay him. He vanishes. You sigh, slump against a pillar, and try Not to think about the rest of the day? It's 9 a.m. You've already made a terrible trade, stepped in something you don't want to identify, and been tricked by an 8-year-old entrepreneur. Welcome to the market square. You'll be lucky to make it to noon. You begin to feel it. Around midday, the uncomfortable churn. Maybe it's the questionable lizard taco you didn't technically agree to eat. Maybe it's the pulque sample from the very persuasive vendor who called you warrior material. Either way, your stomach is staging a full-scale rebellion. And now, you have to face a reality that modern plumbing has saved most of us from the Aztec toilet situation. Spoiler, there isn't one. Not in the way you're hoping. If you're a noble. Congratulations. You likely have a small, enclosed chamber in your compound. A neatly dug pit. And servants who, brace yourself, collect the waste to sell as fertilizer. Yes, people paid for that. The Aztecs were nothing if not efficient. Nothing was wasted, including waste. But you are not a noble. You are a commoner in the packed, pulsing belly of Tenochtitlán, which means you have two options: the canal, or the public spot behind the market's tamale tent, which has become an unofficial comfort station for those in gastrointestinal distress. It is neither comfortable nor particularly stationary. You shuffle toward it, knees tight, dignity looser by the second. Several others hover nearby, forming the most awkward queue in history. Everyone stares straight ahead. No one talks. This is the unspoken agreement of ancient public defecation. Pretend you're alone and everything is fine. You crouch behind a woven reed screen. The smell is ancient. The ground is slick. A chicken is watching you. You whisper an apology. There's no toilet paper, of course. You improvise with a handful of crushed maize husks and a strong will to survive. A noble might have access to soft leaves or even cloth. You have regret. The chicken is still watching. The Aztecs, to their credit, understood waste management better than many of their contemporaries. Tenochtitlan had public sanitation patrols, sweeping the streets and even hauling trash in canoes to designated dumping zones. Human waste, too, had its place in this cycle of reuse. But reuse and comfort do not always overlap. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs truly prioritized hygiene or simply had a very practical approach to not dying of dysentery. Either way, the result is the same: no privacy, no relief, no flush, just you, some husks, and a paltry witness. You stand, shaky and scarred, and try to rejoin society. There is no hand-washing station. The canal is too far and smells like fermented duck. You wipe your hands on your tunic and immediately regret everything. The market continues without noticing your personal tragedy. Vendors shout, children chase each other with beetles on strings, and the smell of grilled squash wafts through the air with cruel precision. You, however, feel like a post-apocalyptic survivor. You limp back to your corner of the market and try to rearrange your flowers, hoping no one notices your haunted expression. The frog-selling boy reappears, sniffs the air, and slowly backs away. Later, you watch a woman throw a handful of ash and lime into a trench near a noble house's outer wall. This is their version of odor control. You envy her access to ash. Someone sneezes violently behind you, and you realize with a start that you're probably not going to get a break. The market is open all day. You eat here, trade here, and yes, suffer here. The reed walls of the comfort zone rustle in the wind, like the flaps of some terrible circus tent you never agreed to visit. You start to plan your future bathroom trips with military precision. Don't eat too much. Don't drink anything suspicious. Don't trust pulque samples from men with missing teeth. And most importantly, never lock eyes with a chicken while squatting. That memory will outlive you. By sunset, you've earned new respect for every ancient stomach that endured this experience. And if someone ever tells you that the Aztecs didn't have toilet paper, because they were in tune with nature. Feel free to send them here with a bag of husks and an untrained chicken. You have officially used an Aztec market latrine. You will never be the same. Your stomach may have settled barely, but now comes the next survival challenge: eating. And unlike your modern existence, where what's for dinner is a mild curiosity, here in the Aztec market square, it's a very real gamble. You don't choose the food. The food chooses you. And sometimes it chooses to make you deeply uncomfortable. You're hungry. Understandable, considering you've been on your feet since sunrise and recently survived a traumatic toilet episode with nothing but husks and shame. But this market, Tlatelolco, is massive, the largest in Mesoamerica, with upwards of 60,000 people squeezing past steaming stalls, squawking animals, and yelling vendors. There's food everywhere. But what exactly counts as edible depends on how brave or desperate you feel. You start safe tamales, thick, starchy, corn-based bundles steamed in husks, bland, but filling. Except the one you get is filled with what you think is squash blossom. Until you notice tiny legs sticking out. It's grasshopper season. Again. The Aztecs weren't squeamish about protein. Insects, yes. Frogs, of course. Axolotl, delicious. Even dogs, specifically the hairless Zoloids quintly, were considered a delicacy. You pause before the spit-roasted row of Zolos. Their eyes are mercifully closed. You move on. You spot a stew bubbling in a clay pot. It smells spicy, earthy, live. You lean in, and the vendor proudly declares it's made with amaranth, beans, and just a touch of mole made from roasted chilies, ground pumpkin seeds, and cacao. Yes, the sacred cacao. You're intrigued until he explains it's also thickened with ground ants. You pretend your stomach didn't just turn inside out. You settle on something that looks suspiciously like corn on the cob. This, at least, is familiar. Until you bite into it and realize the kernels have been soaked in lime water. That's nixtamalization, a process the Aztecs developed to make corn digestible and vitamin-rich. It's scientifically genius. It also tastes like wet limestone, but it will keep you alive. Historians still argue whether the average Aztec commoner was nutritionally better off than their European counterparts. On one hand, the Aztecs ate an astonishing variety of vegetables, tomatoes, avocados, chayote, beans, squash, and maize formed the heart of their diet. On the other hand, the seasoning was less salt and more fiery obliteration. You try a drink to wash it all down. Not water, never water. The canal system may be a marvel of engineering, but you've seen too many dead fish to trust it. Instead, you're handed a gourd of Adol, a warm, thick maize drink with cinnamon and honey. It's sweet, almost comforting, until the aftertaste of chili kicks in like a surprise interrogation. Still, it could be worse. You watch a noblewoman nibbling on something that looks like black pudding. Turns out it's blood mixed with maize flour and steamed in leaves. Fancy, yes. Digestible, debatable. There's a low murmur near a side stall. You wander over and find a small gathering of men huddled around what looks like a sacrificial altar of snacks. One holds a wafer of what he proudly calls God bread, amaranth seeds pressed into sacred shapes. It's crunchy and weirdly sweet, and also used in ceremonies that sometimes involve blood. You hope this one didn't. The line between food and offering here is thin. Many items are both sacred and snackable. Cacao, for instance, was not only currency, it was also used to make zocalado, a bitter drink often mixed with chili and consumed before rituals. You try some. It tastes like a breakup in liquid form. Back at your stall, someone offers you a treat. Honey-roasted maguey worms. You pretend to be full. You are, after all. Learning to survive, not thrive. As the sun lowers and the crowd thickens with evening buyers, you reflect on your day's intake. Crushed maize, seasoned bugs, ceremonial seeds, and enough chili to classify your tongue as a battleground. Your stomach protests, but your spirit is oddly proud. You didn't die. Yet. A passing vendor hands you a tortilla filled with beans and something unidentifiable but pleasantly smoky. You bite, you chew, you nod. This might be the closest you've come to joy. Congratulations. You've eaten in the heart of the Aztec world. You've faced the chili. You've outwitted the worm. And now, you just have to survive digestion. Let's talk fashion. Or, more accurately, let's talk what happens when function, ritual, and a complete lack of synthetic fabric collide in a humid, crowded Aztec marketplace. You're here for one day, but your skin already regrets it. Welcome to a world where clothing is both sacred expression and constant irritation. You begin with your tunic, or tilma, depending on your status, woven from coarse agave or cotton. It's less outfit of the day and more itch blanket. If you're lucky, it's cotton. If you're not, and judging by your current rash count, you're not. It's woven from fibers that could double as punishment. The good news, it breathes. The bad news, so does everything else, including the bugs now nesting inside it. No zippers, no buttons, no elastic waistbands, just knots, ties, and the quiet despair of a robe that keeps falling off one shoulder. The sash cuts into your midsection like it's trying to start a revolution. You shift it. It fights back. Sandals, if you even get any, are made from woven plant fiber or animal hide. And they do not care about arch support. With every step, your heel slaps against hardened street mud and crushed corn husks. You try to look confident, but your walk now resembles someone fleeing a bee with gout. You spot a few elites in fancier garb. Brilliant blues and reds, dyed from crushed insects and rare plants. Their cloaks ripple like woven rainbows. Yours has a patch that might be mold, or might be ceremonial paint. Either way, it's starting to smell like ambition gone wrong. Jewelry is everywhere, even on toddlers. Shells, obsidian, jade, each piece a subtle scream of, I'm important. You try to barter for a bracelet. The vendor laughs and offers you a broken feather. You accept. It's the most status you've held all day. And then there's body paint. Yes, paint. You think it's decorative until someone explains that each symbol wards off a specific misfortune, hunger, illness, or bad weather. You ask what yours means. The old woman replies, confusion. Accurate. Body modification is also big here. Nose piercings, lip plugs, ear spools. You see a merchant with jade circles the size of dinner rolls dangling from his lobes. You try not to stare, but they sway hypnotically, like ceremonial wind chimes. Historians still argue whether these modifications marked rank, beauty, or simply a cultural tradition too bold for modern HR departments. Sweat pools in places you forgot existed. The tropical sun doesn't just bake you, it bastes you. And since your outfit covers only the bare minimum, every uncovered patch of skin is a canvas for UV regret. You'd kill for sunscreen instead. Someone offers you a paste made of ground avocado and ash. You smear it on. You smell like burnt guacamole. You carry on. Parasites always. Lice are practically accessories here. They don't discriminate. Nobles, commoners, everyone's scratching like it's an interpretive dance. One man combs through his hair with a sliver of bone, muttering curses in Nahuatl. Another calmly picks a flea from his leg and flicks it into a passing fire. You nod in respect. That's survival. You pass a group of dancers performing in intricate feathered cloaks. The feathers shimmer vivid greens, radiant blues. You clap. A feather falls off and lands in your hair. It's the best thing that's happened all day. You decide not to move. Even makeup is a thing. Some women paint their teeth black for beauty. You're tempted, if only to hide the chili-stained terror happening inside your mouth. Others apply crushed mica to their faces for a glittery finish. It's mesmerizing. It's also in your eye now. You blink through the sparkle. You duck into a shaded stall for relief and find a weaver at work. Her fingers move like wind over a loom. The cloth is patterned with gods, stars, and serpents. She hands you a scrap. It's soft, almost impossibly so. She says it's woven from cotton grown on sacred land. You ask how much. She says a week's wages. You gently hand it back and pretend you were just admiring the symmetry. As the sky dims and the air cools by about half a degree, your fabric finally stops clinging to your body like a desperate ex. Your sandals, however, have fused to your feet. You might need a chisel later. By nightfall, you've learned two things. First, Aztec fashion is complex, spiritual, and astonishingly vibrant. Second, your armpits may never forgive you. Your teeth are fine, you think? Or they were 12 hours ago. But now, after a full day of bargaining, chewing mystery maize, and watching strangers bite straight through sugarcane like it's celery, you feel it, a dull ache blooming behind your molars, pulsing in sync with your regret. Welcome to the thrilling world of Aztec dental hygiene. Spoiler, there is none. Not in the modern sense. Anyway, no toothbrushes, no minty toothpaste, and absolutely no floss, unless you count that suspicious corn husk stuck between your teeth. And if you do, congratulations, you're already more resourceful than most. Aztecs, to their credit, did have some form of oral care, chewing on aromatic twigs, rinsing with salt water, occasionally using crushed charcoal or chalk to scrub the teeth. You try one of these sticks. It tastes like guilt and bark. Still, you chew. It does nothing for the leftover bean paste currently fermenting behind your incisors. You smile at a passing vendor. She recoils slightly. Uh-oh. Is it the breath? It might be the breath. No gum, no mints, no discreet peppermint sprays. You'd kill for a Tic Tac instead. Someone offers you a sprig of fragrant herbs like Basil's bitter cousin used to freshen breath. You pop it in. Your mouth now tastes like a graveyard for salads. There's a boy beside you who whistles through a gap where a tooth used to be. He tells you proudly that it was knocked out in a ritual ball game. You nod and pretend you're impressed, while internally taking notes on how not to smile too hard or speak too fast. And if a tooth rots, oh, it comes out. With what? You ask. Sometimes obsidian blades, sometimes stone tools, sometimes just brute force and a terrifying friend with a good grip. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs had designated tooth pullers or whether it was a horrifying group project. Either way, there's no anesthesia, just pain, sweat, and a really strong stick to bite down on. You ask around for a healer. A woman with tattoos on her cheeks points you to a calm old man near the temple steps. He smiles, unfortunately. His own teeth are jagged like cracked pottery, some dark, some missing. But he's revered. A Tenochtitlán, a healer, part priest, part herbalist, part dental improviser. You sit. He examines your mouth with a tool made from fishbone and sharp curiosity. He mutters something in Nahuatl that you're 80% sure translates to, not great. He smears a paste of crushed chili, salt, and pulped flowers onto your gums. It burns. Then it burns more. Then you briefly question your existence. Then, nothing. Numb. Your whole mouth goes weirdly numb. You can't tell if it's mystical medicine or a psychosomatic shutdown. Either way, the pain's dulled. You thank him profusely. He pats your shoulder and hands you a small obsidian mirror. You smile into it. You immediately stop. Your teeth look prehistoric. Yellowed. Worn. Your gums slightly inflamed. Honestly, after a day in this place, your whole face looks like it's aged 10 years. You swear you had enamel this morning. You check again. It's now more of a suggestion. Aztec elites, interestingly enough, practice tooth carving. That's right. Decorative notches and grooves etched into teeth, sometimes inlaid with jade, or turquoise, a permanent smile upgrade. If you can survive the operation, historians still argue whether this was done purely for status or had ritual significance. You try to imagine someone using obsidian to file their own front tooth. You physically shudder. Hard pass. You make your way back toward the market. A child hands you a tamale. You hesitate, but hunger wins. You take a bite. It's dense, sticky, delicious. And then it hits a nerve. A real, exposed, angry nerve. You drop the tamale. You curse into the wind. Somewhere in the distance, an obsidian dentist smiles. Your jaw throbs. Your headache grows. Your dreams of dental insurance fade. You reach again for the minty herb, chew it slowly, and accept your fate. At least nobody here uses leeches. That's a small win. Your teeth still ache as dawn yawns over the stone skyline. But pain doesn't excuse you not here, especially not in the Aztec market square, where labor isn't just a way of life. It's the only thing keeping you from becoming a cautionary tale. You blink blearily at the already buzzing square. Women are setting up stalls with practiced precision, kneeling on woven mats and arranging produce in pyramids of perfection. Maize, beans, squash, amaranth, all looking more organized than your thoughts. Meanwhile, men haul baskets of obsidian tools, dried fish, or smoked chilies, their backs permanently bent from a lifetime of repetition. You, however, have no designated task. So someone gives you one. A bundle of firewood nearly your height is dropped into your arms with all the ceremony of a sneeze. You carry, a stern woman says. And so you do, because saying no here is about as effective as trying to outrun the sun. The bundle bites into your shoulder like regret. You shuffle through the crowd, dodging dogs, dodging priests, dodging children chasing turkeys like it's an Olympic event. Sweat pools beneath your armpits before the morning haze even lifts. Welcome to the full-body workout known as existing in Aztec Tenochtitlán. You pass by a woman grinding maize with a materia slab of volcanic stone, and she doesn't look up. She's been doing this for hours. Her hands move like clockwork. Her shoulders like stone. Her eyes distant. You'd offer to help, but it's clear you'd slow her down. Women here aren't spared. They cook. They clean. They weave. They vend. Some even serve as priestesses or healers. But the workload, relentless. You see a teenage girl with a basket of laundry and a baby on her hip. She looks exhausted. You nod sympathetically. She nods back with a look that says, "This is the light part of my day." Children. They're not in school. Not yet. Many begin helping at home or in the fields as early as age 5. You spot a little boy selling carved toys. His sales pitch is excellent. You want to hire him as your manager? Then you remember this is his life, not a side hustle. You're told to help with fishing nets next. You agree too quickly, and now you're ankle deep in lake muck, tugging at tangles of rope while your hands blister. The sun climbs higher, your temper lowers, your appreciation for ergonomic design skyrockets. But unfortunately, it's about 500 years too early for that, somewhere nearby. A potter is shaping clay with hands so smooth and quick, it feels like witchcraft. You stare too long. He notices. Want to try? He asks. You do. It goes poorly. Your bowl collapses into a sad spiral. He smiles politely. You back away. Dignity in tatters. Labor isn't just hard here, it's constant. The idea of a weekend off doesn't exist. Neither does the concept of burnout. You work until your hands crack, or your muscles seize, and your breath is a wheeze. Then you sleep barely and start again. You hear rumors of those with easier jobs, scribes, priests, elite warriors. But even those require intense training and rigid expectations. You can't just tick-tock your way into upward mobility. You have to earn it, survive it, and outlast it. Historians still argue whether the market economy offered true class mobility or whether it simply reshuffled the same exhausted deck. Either way, you're stuck holding the same card physical labor, and it's not folding anytime soon. Your final task of the day, carrying water from the canals to a vendor's stall. It's heavy. It sloshes. And of course, your foot slips on a cobblestone. The jug crashes. Water floods your legs. The vendor looks furious. You brace for a scolding. Instead, she sighs, hands you a smaller jug. Try again. And somehow, that's worse. Because now you know there's no escaping the grind. Not with excuses. Not with pity. Not even with spilled water. You trudge back to the canal. Sun finally dips. Your arms scream. Your feet, traitorous. Your whole body feels like someone has replaced your bones with damp obsidian. You lie down for a second. Just one. And realize you still have to do it all again tomorrow. You wake up sore. Of course, the kind of sore that makes you question whether you slept at all, or simply laid there marinating in your own exhaustion. But that's not the problem. The problem is the heat. The Aztec sun does not ask permission. It simply arrives overbearing, radiant, and smug. There's no glass in the windows, no breeze in the house, and definitely no climate control. The roof, made of packed reeds or thatch, does an excellent job of trapping heat. You're essentially inside a giant slow cooker, and you are the stew. Your tunic sticks to your skin like regret. It's made of rough maguey fiber, better than nothing, worse than breathable cotton. Sweat streaks your face before you've stood up. Someone shouts your name outside, or at least you assume they do. It's too hot to argue about semantics. You emerge, blinking into the molten world. Summer here is not fun. There are no sandals and lemonade stands. There are biting insects, burning stones underfoot, and the smell, the smell of a market in full fermentation, raw meat, fish guts, human density, chili smoke. Add a few piles of manure and you've got the full Aztec sensory package. You seek shade but find politics. Only vendors with official permissions can claim the best awning spots in the square. You, the perpetually unlucky, are told to stand by the fish stall. Again, you brace for the aroma. And yes, it still smells like Poseidon's revenge. Some elderly women near the cacao stall fan themselves with woven palm leaves. You envy their wisdom. You envy their fans. But mostly, you envy that they're sitting. The sun cooks your scalp. You wonder if sunstroke is a socially accepted excuse for fainting. The answer is probably no. And just when you think the worst is over, thunder claps in the distance. But wait, this is good. Right. A break in the heat. A breeze wrong. This is monsoon season. Rain arrives in sheets. And it doesn't ask if you finish packing up the wares. It floods the causeways, turns the carefully swept market square into a mud wrestling arena. You sprint for shelter, which means huddling under a vendor's reed umbrella with 12 other strangers. Intimacy is redefined. Historians still argue whether the Aztec city's canals truly functioned as effective flood control, or if they just helped the water reach you faster. Either way, you're soaked, you're sneezing, and now your sandals, if you can call them that, are disintegrating like wet cardboard. You long for something dry, anything. Your clothes drenched, your mat damp, your spirit moldy. And night hasn't even fallen. When it finally does, the temperature flips like a cruel joke. The dampness that clung to your skin all day now chills your bones. There's no insulation, no fireplace, no cozy blanket. You curl into yourself, trying to trap whatever warmth your body can produce. It's less sleeping and more strategic shivering. And in this moment, half melted, half frozen, you realize something about Aztec weather. It's not your enemy. Enemies can be fought. This is more like a distant bureaucrat with immense power and no accountability. It simply exists to make you uncomfortable and occasionally ruin your plans. You hear someone coughing in the next room. Deep, rattling, wet. You hope it's not contagious. You hope it's not serious. But mostly, you hope it's not your turn next. One of the fringe facts you overheard this week was that the Aztecs believed certain gods controlled specific winds. One wind caused fevers, another brought confusion. You consider blaming them for your headaches. At least that would feel more personal than blaming the weather. By morning, the sun will be back. So will the mud. So will the biting flies in the jug you still haven't replaced. And when you look out across the glistening, puddled square, you will once again feel that heavy truth settle on your shoulders. You are not built for this. Not for this heat. Not for this cold. Not for this endless pendulum of sweat and shiver. You are a popsicle in the oven. A cactus in a snowstorm. A very damp, very confused time traveler who really should have read the climate section in the travel brochure. You wake up with a dry mouth and a dangerous thirst. Not the kind of thirst a cold soda or a frappuccino might fix, but the primal kind. The kind your organs complain about in unison. You reach for water. Of course you do. But here, in the market district of Tenochtitlán, water is not your friend. It's a gamble. You scoop water from a nearby jug, but you didn't boil it last night. No time, no fuel. And besides, it looked clean. Famous last words. It tastes like disappointment and copper. Still, you drink it because the alternative is worse, and because everyone else does. You'd think living in a floating city one built on a lake would make clean water easy to come by. That's what modern logic suggests. But no, the lake is brackish, salty, a little gift from nature saying, "You thought this would be convenient. Huh." So the Aztecs built aqueducts, true feats of engineering brilliance, channeling fresh water in from nearby springs. Unfortunately, you don't live near the aqueducts. And even if you did, historians still argue whether that water ever made it reliably to regular citizens. Some say it did. Others suggest the nobility may have prioritized their fancy flower gardens first, because who needs hydration when the dahlias are blooming? So instead, you rely on communal jugs, sometimes refilled by the rain, sometimes by water porters whose idea of clean is mostly a philosophical stance. The container itself smells like wet leather and old socks. You hope your immune system is in a good mood today. Bathing. Oh, how romantic that sounds. The image of steam, of relaxation, of washing the world away. Well, banish it. Bathing here is an event, a process, and most of all, a risk. Sure, the temazcal, steam baths exist, but not everyone has access. And if you do manage to sweat out your dirt in one, don't expect it to erase your real problems. Because many people still wash in open pools, river edges, public basins. You lower yourself in with caution, praying no one upstream is also washing something else. You get out only to feel just as dirty 2 hours later, maybe worse. And bathing too often. That's how you invite illness? That's what they say? Open pores are basically welcome mats for diseased spirits. So you dab your armpits with herbs and scrape your skin with stones and just kind of hope. Now back to your guts. They are not pleased. Your stomach churns like a canoe in a whirlpool. That's because some microscopic terror probably hitchhiked in on this morning's water, something wormy or amoebic or spectacularly unpronounceable. And now you've got diarrhea. Again. You're starting to forget what solid bowel movements even feel like. Oh, and did we mention parasites? Some fringe tidbit from last week's overheard gossip in the market told you that even nobles get worms. Even priests. It's not just you. So you're in excellent company, if that helps. It doesn't. You crawl out of bed, or more accurately, your woven mat and stagger toward the latrine area. It's more of a pit with a privacy wall. There's no toilet paper, no flush, no dignity. And when you're done, there's no hand soap either. You rub your hands with ash and rinse with, guess what, more of that probably fine water. Your hands are never truly clean. Your hope also running low. Your mouth tastes foul. You remember yesterday's street corn had a suspicious crunch. Was that grit or insect? You'll never know. At this point, water has betrayed you so many times that you start seeing it differently. Less as a gift of life, more as a test. A gauntlet. A slow-motion dare issued by the gods. You try boiling it. Sometimes. But firewood isn't free. And smoke brings attention. You try filtering it through cloth. But now your cloth smells like pond slime. You pray for rain and curse it when it floods your sleeping mat. You are, in short, losing. Losing to the oldest foe humanity has ever faced. Bad water. Not an army, not a jaguar, not a heart-sacrificing priest, just H2O with attitude. By now, your lips are cracked, your eyes sunken. You've thrown up twice today. Your neighbor swears by a certain root that cleanses the belly. You chew it. It's bitter. You gag, but you're desperate. And you start to realize this market square, for all its brilliance, its dazzling color, its floating gardens and chirping musicians, is a place where water, the most basic ingredient for survival, plays roulette with your life. It's ironic, really. The city is surrounded by it, but that's the trick. You're surrounded, not saved. And when night falls, you sip a little from a fresh jug someone swears came from the good barrel. You believe them, because what else can you do? You drink. You lie back. You listen to the sound of dripping water somewhere in the corner. And you pray that tonight, just tonight, it will stay outside your body. The night creeps in over the lake, casting a silver hush across the canals of Tenochtitlán. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays softly, its notes rising above the faint splash of paddles and market echoes gone quiet. The crowds have thinned, the stalls are packed away, but your body still hums with exhaustion. Your stomach still churns with questions, and your feet still ache with a kind of ancient memory. And yet, there is calm now. Not peace, exactly, but stillness. You're wrapped in a woven cloak, lying on a mat that's softer than you remember. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the fever. Maybe it's just sleep pressing gently on your shoulders. You've outlasted the crowd. You've bartered with strangers, dodged illness, wrestled with maze and parasites, and stared directly into the eyes of a water jug that wanted you dead. And somehow, you're still here, still breathing, still whole, more or less. So let your thoughts drift with the lake. Let your heartbeat match the hush of the city. Let your muscles forget. You've survived a day in the Aztec market square. Now, you deserve the now. We drift into the dim hush of a palace in Coimbra, Portugal, sometime in the year 1360. The walls are thick with velvet. The air smells faintly of melted wax and dried rosemary. And outside, the sun is politely pretending not to exist. You would never think a royal wedding could begin with a coffin, but here it does. The chapel is lit. The throne is polished. The queen is dead, and King Pedro is about to marry her anyway. He wears black. Not out of mourning, but insistence. The priests are here. Nobles are here. And the corpse of Inez de Castro, his murdered lover, is here too, seated in silence and silk. This is not a poetic metaphor. She's physically present, slightly decayed, slightly regal, entirely terrifying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. The bishop coughs nervously. Another adjusts his collar. They've performed hundreds of royal rites before, but never for someone who's been underground for 2 years. No one knows what to say. So Pedro says it for them. This is my wife. This was my wife. This will be my queen. You watch as the courtiers, those wonderfully adaptable creatures, process what that means. Kneeling before a queen is one thing. Kneeling before a corpse is another. Still, no one wants to end up like the last people who displeased Pedro. So they bow. They kneel. Some kiss the hand. Most try not to look directly at it. Historians still argue whether Inez's corpse was embalmed, sewn back together, or simply dressed well enough to pass under candlelight. Some say she was reconstructed with wax. Others suggest Pedro simply willed everyone to see what he saw. Not death, but memory draped in velvet. Either way, it was the most unsettling bridal procession in Western Europe. The ceremony itself is short. A reading, a vow, a moment of silence so thick you could slice it with a papal decree. Then, the crown symbolic, heavy, absurd, is placed gently upon her head. It slips a little. Someone catches it. No one laughs. You stand among the attendants, silent, not breathing. The throne room feels colder than stone. It's not fear exactly. It's the realization that you're watching someone refuse reality. And worse, you kind of respect it. Pedro has made his point in life. He was denied the right to marry her. In death, he will not be denied again. And so he marries her formally, fully, publicly. No legal loopholes, no metaphors. Just a king, a corpse, and a court forced to pretend this is business as usual. Afterward, a feast is held. No one eats. A musician plays a slow, trembling song that sounds like the theme to a heartbreak stitched onto a battlefield. Pedro toasts to the queen. No one dares correct the tense. You return to your chamber, exhausted, haunted, and oddly moved. It wasn't a wedding. Not really. But it was something. Something furious. Something stubborn. Something unforgettable. Years earlier, long before the candlelit corpse coronation, Prince Pedro falls in love, and it's the kind of love that makes kingdoms very nervous. Her name is Inés de Castro. She is Portuguese by residence, Galician by blood, and trouble by every royal standard. She arrives as a lady-in-waiting to Pedro's official bride, Constanza. But she doesn't stay in the background, no. Inés glides through court like a lit match in a room full of silk curtains. You would never think that a side eye from a lady-in-waiting could shape national policy. But kingdoms in the 14th century are extremely flammable. Pedro is immediately captivated. Not just smitten obsessed. He writes poems. He ignores protocol. He spends more time with Inés than with his actual wife. Which, of course, makes everything awkward and possibly treasonous. The royal court goes into quiet panic mode. To King Afonso IV, Pedro's father, does the royal version of grounding his son. He orders Inés out of court, out of sight, and preferably out of the country. It doesn't stick. Pedro brings her back, or rather, she drifts back through excuses, loopholes, and the kind of coincidences that only happen when two people are determined to be inconvenient. Historians still argue whether Inés was politically dangerous or just romantically unpopular. Some say her Galician connections could have handed Portugal's crown to Castile through marriage diplomacy gone wrong. Others think she was simply a scapegoat, blamed for Pedro's refusal to play the obedient prince. Either way, she becomes a problem too large for the throne room and far too captivating for Pedro to give up. The lovers retreat to Coimbra, where the river murmurs secrets and royal messengers arrive regularly with gentle reminders to end the affair. Pedro, ever diplomatic, ignores them. Constanza dies of illness, officially, and instead of moving on. Pedro moves deeper. He and Inés raise children together. They live like husband and wife in everything but name. He builds gardens. She builds trust. Together, they build a very quiet scandal. One fringe account says they exchanged secret vows in a private chapel, no witnesses. Just hands clasped and promises whispered. Legally, it means nothing. Emotionally, it's everything. Pedro begins referring to her as his partner, his queen in all but title. And everyone else, they start calculating how much trouble one beautiful, clever, politically inconvenient woman can cause if she lives too long. Meanwhile, Inez walks through the court with the quiet poise of someone who knows she's a problem, but refuses to apologize for it. She smiles politely. She raises her children. She avoids the kind of bold statements that get people beheaded. And still, she remains exactly where Pedro wants her. Not quite mistress, not quite queen, but dangerously close to both. You watch it unfold like a slow, doomed song. Everyone knows the ending will be ugly. Just no one knows how ugly yet. By now, the palace is humming not with music, but with tension thick enough to butter bread. Pedro and Inez are living in semi-exile in Coimbra, and everyone pretends it's a perfectly normal arrangement. The prince, his not-quite wife, their not-quite royal children, and a growing pile of unsent invitations to court events. Officially, there's no scandal. Unofficially, it's the worst-kept secret in the kingdom. You wouldn't think romantic exile could look so well furnished. Their estate is full of fountains, poetry, and a disturbing number of fruit carvings shaped like lions. Pedro writes verses to Inez, full of grief and longing even though she's still alive. He calls her my queen in silence, which is deeply romantic and also deeply unhelpful to his public relations team. They exchange letters constantly when he travels, when she's unwell, when the court grows cold. Some are passionate, some are political. One rumored note simply read, "I would burn this kingdom to keep you warm." The king probably read that one too, and probably added firewood to his emergency budget. Historians still argue whether Pedro and Inez were secretly married before her death. Some sources claim a private ceremony took place in Bragança. Others dismiss it as posthumous myth-making, convenient romance for uncomfortable revenge. The truth, somewhere between a chapel vow and a poetic rewrite of grief. Meanwhile, back in Lisbon, King Afonso is aging, and his advisors are aging faster from sheer anxiety. They see Inez as a wedge between Pedro and proper royal responsibility. She is not just a mistress, she is a foreigner, a mother to royal children, and a symbol of disobedience. And worst of all, she's still very much alive. One courtier writes that the children of Inez begin to show ambition. Another describes them as bright-eyed and dangerously legitimate in appearance. You can almost hear the palace doors slamming shut. The pressure mounts. Letters go unanswered. Invitations are revoked. Royal emissaries stop smiling when Pedro walks into a room. Even the fountains in Coimbra seem to run colder. And then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like someone's drawing a sword off stage. Inez stops receiving letters. The king stops sending word. The messenger arrives at the gates of Coimbra, not with parchment, but with nothing at all. Just a bowed head, and then he leaves. Inez begins to worry. Pedro begins to pace. You begin to realize that a slow-motion tragedy is still a tragedy. It just gives everyone time to dress for the funeral. One morning, Inez asks a servant if the king has summoned her. The answer is no, but soon, someone else will. It happens behind monastery walls, because even in 14th century Portugal, assassinations prefer a little ambiance. You wake to the bells of Santa Clara ringing low over Coimbra, and the sky is that kind of gray that makes every bad thing feel inevitable. Inez has been summoned not to court, not to trial, but to an informal conversation with the king's men. She brings no guards, no royal title, just grace, silence, and the weight of everything Pedro once promised her. The monks say she prayed before it happened. The king's advisors do not bring parchment. They bring swords, and that, in the most cowardly of historical footnotes, is where the scene ends. No surviving document describes exactly how Inés de Castro died. But the fragments we do have are enough. She was pulled from sanctuary, accused of corrupting the prince, and executed in front of at least one of her children. Some say she begged. Some say she cursed. Some say she only whispered Pedro's name. Historians still argue whether King Afonso IV directly ordered her death, or simply allowed it to happen. Some sources claim he regretted it immediately. Others suggest he was convinced she posed a threat too dangerous to ignore. Either way, he left no signature, only silence and 3 bloodstains on holy stone. Pedro was away when it happened. When he returned, the house was quiet, the air metallic, and the children oddly composed. One servant tried to tell him gently. Another handed him her veil. He said nothing for an entire day. Then he broke a goblet against the fireplace and said, "The kingdom will remember her." And it did, but not yet. First came the burial, quick, unmarked, under the watch of guards rather than mourners. There were no royal rites, no procession, just a shallow grave and a deeper wound. Pedro went still, not angry, not loud, still, and that, for those who knew him, was worse than rage. He returned to court with the expression of a man calculating not if he would seek revenge, but when, one courtier later wrote. He carried himself as though the sun had failed to rise, and he intended to drag it back up himself. In the weeks that followed, the palace grew cold. Not from winter, from Pedro. He stopped eating in the great hall. He stopped answering letters. He wrote only one thing, over and over, Inés será mi reina. Inés will be my queen. Not was. Not would have been. Will be. And the advisors, those very clever men who thought they could quietly remove the king's problem, began to wonder whether they had created something far worse. A prince with no bride, a kingdom with no peace, and a love story with no end. Pedro does not grieve like a man. He grieves like a fire. After Inés's murder, the palace becomes a mausoleum. The throne room echoes. The feast hall empties. He keeps her comb on his desk and her letters under lock and key. Servants learn not to speak her name aloud. The moment someone says, "Your Highness, it is time to remarry," the silence in the room sharpens like a blade. You would never think heartbreak could destabilize a monarchy, but that's only if you've never seen a man mourn while holding a crown. When his father dies in 1357, Pedro takes the throne not as a ruler, but as a storm wearing robes. The kingdom expects a formal coronation. Pedro gives them vengeance instead. First, he sends messengers not for peace, but for names. Those who arranged Inés's death, Pero Coelho and Álvaro Goncalves, are hunted down, dragged back to court, and offered the full force of royal catharsis. No trial, no speeches, just a public execution so legendary it enters Portuguese folklore via tapestry. Yes, tapestry. Pedro reportedly has the men's hearts torn out Coelhos from the front, Goncalves's from the back, and has the moment embroidered into wall hangings. Because why just punish someone when you can also decorate with their regrets? Historians still argue whether this detail is true or embroidered pun, painfully intended by later storytellers. Some say it was symbolic. Others say Pedro sat through the embroidery process personally, requesting more emphasis on the arteries. Either way, it was a clear message: kill the queen, lose your heart. The court is stunned. Nobles begin triple-checking their alliances. Diplomats from Castile write very careful letters. Pedro, meanwhile, continues ruling Portugal with a fist in one hand and a love letter in the other. He signs royal decrees with a steady hand and keeps her portrait behind every throne. One account says he carried a lock of her hair sewn into his tunic. Another claims he renamed 2 vineyards after her. Whether true or not, Portugal learns quickly Inez may be dead. But she is not gone. Even his decisions seem to carry her shadow. He favors her surviving relatives. He honors their children together, elevating them into positions of power. And when people murmur about the legitimacy of those children, Pedro does not respond with proclamations. He responds with a plan that involves digging, because he isn't finished. Not yet. 2 years after claiming the throne, Pedro decides to make good on a promise no one thought he'd keep, and most hoped he wouldn't mention ever again. He announces that he and Inez were secretly married before her death, in the town of Braganca, witnessed only by the stars, 2 priests, and an unfortunate lack of paperwork. Naturally, the court panics. You'd think a royal secret wedding with no surviving documents and one very dead bride would be the end of the story. But no. This is Pedro, Portugal's most grief-stricken king. He's not here for your logic. He's here for love. And a throne. And apparently, a corpse with a crown. So he sends the order to unearth her. And they do. Inez de Castro is exhumed from her quiet grave. What remains of her is placed in royal robes, gilded fabric, pearls, embroidered sleeves. She is laid not in a coffin, but on a throne. That's not symbolism. That's furniture placement. Then Pedro does what might be the strangest, boldest, and possibly most emotionally unhinged act in Iberian royal history. He holds a coronation for her, a real one. Crowns, bishops, candles, witnesses, a full retinue of clergy who would rather be absolutely anywhere else. Historians still argue whether her body was restructured with wax, cloth, or sheer willpower. Some say she was displayed in such a way that her condition could be politely overlooked in low candlelight. Others suggest Pedro spared no expense in recreating the illusion of life, at least long enough to slip a crown on her head and ask the court to kneel. They do, one by one. Nobles approach the throne and kiss the ring on her dead hand. No one makes eye contact. No one makes. No one asks if rigor mortis has set in. No one dares sneeze. The chapel is silent, but for the sound of fabric brushing stone and the quiet moan of history trying to keep itself together. The gesture is not a stunt. It's not a metaphor. It's a correction. Pedro doesn't just want to honor Inez. He wants to rewrite reality in his eyes. She was always queen. The murder was a crime, not only against love, but against the state. In this coronation, this is justice with embroidery. Afterward, she is reburied not just royally, but symmetrically. Pedro commissions twin marble tombs, one for him, one for Inez, positioned in the monastery of Alcobaca, facing each other so that on Judgment Day, the first thing they see when they rise is each other. Poetic, dramatic, just a little terrifying. You stand in the back of the chapel, stunned. You've seen weddings, you've seen funerals. This is somehow both, and neither. It is grief sculpted into law, love welded to death, and Portugal, for better or worse, bows. Now she is queen, not in life, where she stirred gossip from the shadows of Coimbra's halls, but in death, where no one dares whisper anything less than reverence. Inez de Castro, mistress turned martyr, is now Reina de Portugal. Her name is etched into royal records. Her likeness appears in prayers. And her marble tomb is polished with the kind of diligence usually reserved for relics and royal egos. You walk through the monastery of Alcobaca and see it 2 white stone sarcophagi, elaborate, towering, almost theatrical. Inez lies in one, Pedro in the other position, so that when they both rise on Judgment Day, they will face each other, feet to feet. As if the first thing they'll do after eternity breaks is reach out and say, finally. You'd never think marble could weep, but here, it kind of does. The tombs are carved with angels, vines, and scenes from their tragic love story, stone courtships, and winged grief. One panel even shows Inez being crowned by divine hands, which, if you're keeping score, means the sculpture is doing what the monarchy once refused to. Historians still debate how much of this was genuine grief and how much was carefully orchestrated performance. Was Pedro mad with love strategically mythologizing, or simply a ruler who didn't care anymore what anyone thought? Because the one person whose opinion mattered was already gone. One fringe historian called it the most romantic necropolitics in Europe. Another called it a medieval PR campaign with a corpse budget. What's certain is that Pedro didn't stop with the tomb. He made sure the children he had with Inez, once whispered about in corners, were formally legitimized and granted royal status. The court had no choice but to accept it. After all, what argument do you make to a king who crowned a corpse? Inez becomes legend, every poet's muse, every painter's tragedy, every courtier's cautionary tale. Schools teach her story. Priests preach patience by comparing it to Pedro's. And tourists, even centuries later, still leave flowers at her tomb, unsure whether to weep or applaud. Meanwhile, the former nobles who opposed the match remain footnotes, nameless villains, in a story where the dead get better press than the living. One noble woman privately writes, "He rules us with a crown and a ghost." And she's not wrong. Pedro governs Portugal until his death with increasing eccentricity, steady justice, and the quiet presence of a queen no one can see. He signs laws beneath her portrait. He orders public works in her name, and he ensures above all that when his time comes, he will be laid to rest exactly across from her, eyes aligned, stone fingers forever just out of reach. It is a monument, yes, but also a message to those who doubted them, to those who tried to erase her, to time itself. You step outside the monastery, blinking in the soft Portuguese sun. The world continues: markets, church bells, children laughing, but the echo of their vow still lingers inside, not in speech, in stone. Long after Pedro and Inez have turned to dust beneath their marble crowns, the story spreads like perfume light, lingering and impossible to scrub out of your mind. It escapes Portugal, dances through Castile, and flutters across Europe in the luggage of poets, diplomats, and scandal-loving monks. You hear it in whispers at court banquets. Did you know the king married a corpse? And someone always gasps. But she was beautiful. Wasn't she? Yes. And dead. But apparently, that's just a minor detail in 14th century court gossip. Songs are composed, ballads performed by candlelight. Inez becomes less of a person and more of a symbol, tragic love, royal defiance, and the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the most committed husbands are also slightly terrifying. Historians still argue whether Pedro's story was romantic obsession or strategic vengeance with a floral arrangement. Some say he was mad, ruled by grief and ghosts. Others argue he was brilliant, using emotion to solidify power and carve his heartbreak into something eternal. And still, others suggest both are true, because let's be honest, those are not mutually exclusive. Meanwhile, back in Coimbra, stories evolve. People start claiming the fountain where Inez once walked runs colder than any other, that her ghost appears there on moonless nights, hair loose, face turned toward Pedro's former residence. A guard once claimed she wept red tears. A monk insists the ivy by the convent never dies. You suspect the ivy just has good drainage, but it's more fun to pretend otherwise. Some versions say she roams the corridors of Alcobaça Monastery, searching for Pedro's hand. Others claim she speaks to grieving women in their dreams, reminding them that love, however doomed, is still worth the trouble. The ghost stories get so popular that even skeptical scholars write them down for documentation purposes. One bishop complains that pilgrims now pray to Inez instead of actual saints. Another builds a fence around her tomb to stop people from leaving love notes under her carved feet. And the fountain, it's renamed the Fonte das Lagrimas, the Fountain of Tears. It still exists, still trickling, still very good at reminding people that sometimes romance and horror share a bench, even centuries later. Tourists visit the tombs of Pedro and Inez and lower their voices instinctively. The air feels heavier there. Not spooky, just serious. Like grief that's been ironed and folded into national identity. Poets in the 19th century bring her back again, this time more beautiful, more tragic, and somehow even paler. Painters make her into a saint. Opera singers turn her final breath into a soprano high note. Netflix would have had a field day if candles didn't melt cameras. And through it all, Portugal holds the story close, not just as royal folklore, but as a strangely national act of emotional defiance. A king, a corpse, a crown, and a kingdom that, oddly enough, understands. Because some stories don't die. Some stories refuse. Centuries pass. The kings are long gone. The court has crumbled. The tapestries have faded into threadbare ghosts of themselves. But in the monastery of Alcobaça, two tombs remain stone still, side by side, facing each other with stubborn symmetry. Pedro and Inez, the dead queen who never ruled, the grieving king who made sure she did. You step into the chapel, and the air shifts. Colder here. Quieter. The kind of quiet that feels thick, like it's waiting for someone to whisper. The candles flicker even without wind, and the tombs carved with angels, lions, and scenes of eternal love still look as though they're listening. You would never think that marble could tell a story, but these tombs do. They speak of vows made too late, of promises carved in stone because parchment burned too easily. Pedro lies with his feet pointed toward hers. Because on Judgment Day, the legend says, they'll rise together, eyes first, hands second. Tourists still visit. They take photos, but not loudly. Some leave flowers, others leave coins. A few leave letters folded tight, pressed into crevices like secrets whispered to history. Historians still debate what really happened, whether the marriage was real, whether the coronation was fact or folklore, whether Pedro truly lost his mind or simply found his legacy in grief. But standing here, those questions seem beside the point. The facts are cold. The story is not. It's warm, painfully so, and it lingers. You sit on the bench across from their tombs and watch the light shift on the stone. The sun sneaks through stained glass, casting halos that neither of them asked for. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, slow, deep, ceremonial. You breathe out, softer now. This is not a place of death. It's a place of memory that refused to die. The royal scribes are gone, the priests are silent. But the vow remains. Stone hands, sleeping crowns, eyes forever waiting for the other to open. And as the shadows stretch across the floor, and the last candle sputters, you find your breath slowing too. The world hums lower. The story folds itself closed. The king is at peace. The queen is, finally, seen. And you drift gently. Now, we wake up in a place where the walls don't echo, they absorb. A prison cell in 13th century Bologna. Italy? It smells like wet rope, regret, and soup that's been dreaming of vegetables for 3 days. You sit on a straw mat, feet chained, mouth dry, and mind replaying the same thought over and over. They're going to hang me before market day. Until the guard appears and says, "Get up. You're getting married." You would never think that a death sentence could be commuted with a wedding. But here we are, apparently. All it takes to erase your crimes: petty theft, accidental arson, mild stabbing is a willing bride, and a priest who can show up on time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. You're shuffled out of the cell with your best attempt at dignity, which is hard when you've got one shoe and your formal tunic is just the less stained one. The guards are oddly helpful. One even brushes straw off your shoulder. Executioners rarely get involved in wardrobe prep, but today is different. Today, you're not being led to the gallows. You're being led to the altar. Someone hands you a document, your criminal record, neatly summarized and blessed by a notary who probably stopped reading halfway through. But at the bottom, in fresh ink, it reads, marriage pending, execution delayed. The ink glows like a miracle. Historians still argue how widespread this legal loophole was, but records from several Italian city-states, Bologna, Florence, Siena confirmed that marrying a condemned man could suspend, or even cancel, his punishment. It wasn't mercy, it was paperwork, and occasionally, romance unlikely, but not impossible. The bride hasn't arrived yet. You don't know her name. You don't know what she's been promised or threatened with. You just know she exists. And she said yes. Probably. Maybe. Hopefully. A friar nearby is mumbling a blessing while eyeing you like a failed experiment. You wait in the back of a butcher's shop. The church was busy with a more legitimate wedding. Yours, meanwhile, will take place under a hanging pig carcass and a string of garlic. Symbolism, not ideal, but it's dry, and it counts. The bride walks in. She's wearing a simple dress and the expression of someone who has either made peace with the absurdity of the world or lost a bet. She glances at you. You nod. Chained foot extended slightly, like a nervous bachelor at a medieval mixer. She nods back. The friar clears his throat, and somehow it begins. No choir, no dubs, just two people, a contract, and the faint smell of meat in the background. When he says, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," no one speaks. Mostly because the guards look like they really want this to work. And when it's done, when the words are spoken, the vows barely whispered, and the ink dried on your name, the friar stamps the parchment and mutters, "By God and law, you may go home." The chains come off. You don't cry. Not yet. You just hold your new wife's hand like it might dissolve. The pigs keep swinging overhead, but for now, at least, your neck is safe. You step outside the butcher stall into the sharp, sun-drenched cobblestones of Bologna, and it hits you. You are no longer a prisoner. You are a husband, legally married, socially confusing, and functionally free, though possibly only in the geographical sense. The guards melt back into the crowd like your crime never happened. A friar slips you a roll and says, "Mazel tov," even though he's not entirely sure what language that is. And your bride, she's already walking 2 steps ahead, either in deep thought or attempting to avoid further eye contact. You would never think get married or die was once a functioning piece of civic law. But in 13th century Italy, it absolutely was, particularly in city-states like Bologna, Florence, and even parts of Venice. Local councils developed a delightfully absurd idea. Capital punishment could be overturned by marriage, provided the condemned man was willing to behave and the bride was willing to gamble. The logic, if you squint at it long enough, starts to make sense. Cities were overcrowded, executions were expensive and messy, and public image mattered. Reform was trendy, especially if it involved paperwork. So marry a woman of good standing, she agrees. The state agrees. And suddenly, your crimes are forgiven, or at least postponed until your next public tantrum. Marriage became a legal eraser. A very awkward, emotionally complicated, socially pressurized eraser. Historians still argue whether this practice was driven by genuine reformist intent or a creative method for population control. Some councils even used it as a way to clean up the streets and boost marriage rates simultaneously. One 1263 ordinance in Florence reportedly offered a tax incentive to women who agreed to marry a man of unfortunate judicial entanglement. A fringe scholar once described it as romanticized penal diplomacy. Another called it state-sponsored matchmaking for men with bad impulse control. Either way, it works sometimes. You and your bride walk in silence through a narrow alley that smells like wet parchment and roasted chestnuts. A neighbor peeks out a window and gasps. Word spreads, fast in cities where gossip has better boots than the mailman. She finally turns to you and says, "What did you do?" You pause. You consider. You say. It was mostly misunderstood sheep relocation. She doesn't laugh, but she doesn't leave either. Later that day, a clerk stamps your marriage certificate with a wax seal shaped like a lion. He gives you a look that says, "Don't mess this up, or we both go down." You are now married in the eyes of God, the city, and most importantly, the bailiff. At night, you sleep on a pallet beside a woman you just met. In a borrowed room that smells like hay and nerves, you listen to the silence and realize it's the first silence in weeks that doesn't end in the sound of keys. You're not innocent, but now you're legal. And in 13th century Italy, that's practically the same thing. The morning after, your legally sponsored salvation smells like damp bread, nervous glances, and the faint panic of someone who just realized they married a stranger to avoid the gallows. You sit at a tiny wooden table with your new wife, who is currently deciding whether you're more of a fixer-upper or a municipal mistake. She chews slowly. You smile awkwardly. The silence between bites is legally binding. You would never think marriage could replace a death sentence. But the economics of 13th century Italy make some very strange things not only possible, but financially preferable. Executions are expensive. Trials are messier than you'd think. And having a living, married ex-criminal contributing taxes, that's pure civic efficiency. City-states like Bologna, Siena, and Padua ran on laws, ledgers, and loopholes. And somewhere between no stabbing and please stop stealing goats, someone scribbled a clause: if he marries a respectable woman, we'll pretend he didn't do it. So councils begin to offer incentives. A few cities even maintain informal redemption rosters, basically matchmaking lists, but with more moral anxiety and less wine. In some towns, a woman who marries a condemned man might receive a small dowry from the city treasury, exemption from certain taxes, a chicken, and, in one case, a gently used donkey romance is dead, but civic math is thriving. Historians still argue whether this system was an act of progressive mercy or just bureaucratic thrift. One record from Perugia shows a baker who married a man accused of theft and was immediately forgiven 2 years of flour tax. Another woman reportedly received a leather apron, 3 onions, and a signed pardon for her husband, who had a charming disposition and one fewer ear than usual. Your wife, however, appears to have received no such bonus. Just you. And whatever lingering questions you've wrapped in a tunic and a forced smile. You ask her gently, "Why did you say yes?" She shrugs, then says, "The priest told me you were quiet and had all your teeth." You nod. That is, technically, true. By midday, your legal reintegration begins. You meet with a city clerk who checks your name off the pending execution ledger and moves you onto the conditional redemption list. You are given a parchment copy of your marriage certificate and a list of approved professions. Goat herder is on there. Executioner is not. Probably for the best. Some of your fellow former inmates didn't make it to marriage. One fainted before the altar. One shouted, "Run halfway through the vows." And one, unfortunately, tried to marry 2 brides at once. He is now very single and slightly shorter. You spend the afternoon learning how to make candles, because apparently you need a job and former criminal doesn't sell well at the market. Your wife watches. She doesn't comment. But that night, she brings bread, soft, still warm. You think, maybe not all loopholes are terrible. You wake up the next morning with wax under your fingernails and the slow realization that candle making is both more difficult and more existential than expected. There's something humbling about trying to prove your worth through congealed fat and patience. You dip, you wait, you dip again. Congratulations, you're now a metaphor for yourself. Your wife is gone before sunrise. She's gone to the market or run away. It's unclear. You chew a hunk of bread and stare at the ceiling. No gallows, no priest, no guards, just married to a stranger who may or may not return with eggs. You would never think that a criminal's redemption would rest on beeswax and breakfast. But here you are. Medieval Italy's version of therapy is hard labor, inconsistent affection, and a legal framework that basically shrugs and says, we'll see how it goes. By mid-morning, a neighbor knocks. She's ancient, possibly made of dust and disapproval. She eyes you with the solemn precision of someone judging both your soul and your boots. You're the one who stole bread, she says. You nod. She squints. Married now? You nod again. She sighs and hands you a chicken, apparently. Some townspeople participate in what can only be described as rehabilitative gifting. Once a criminal has legally married, neighbors offer symbolic items to help the new couple begin a better life. Eggs, bread, a broom. One guy once received a live eel, unclear whether that was support or sabotage. Historians still argue whether these neighborly gestures were rooted in Christian charity or just a practical effort to keep newly reformed people from stealing their stuff again. You try to express gratitude. The old woman interrupts. Don't ruin her life, she says, then walks away. Midday passes with a visit to the city registrar. They check that you are, in fact, still alive and not causing any scandals. They then note in the margins of your file, no longer a public threat. Mild candle potential. Progress. You return home with your chicken, who is not named, because you know better than to emotionally invest in livestock. Your wife returns with 2 carrots and a look that says, I see you still exist, which is technically affection. In this context, that evening, you eat soup. It tastes like vegetables that had bigger dreams, but it's warm, and no one yells. Afterward, she asks what crime you committed. You pause. Tell her the truth. She listens, then says, You still have all your teeth? You nod. She nods back. And just like that, you pass the first real test of marriage in 13th century Italy, mutual tolerance through teeth-based diplomacy. The chicken watches this unfold. You think it's judging you. Later, while sweeping, you find a discarded parchment scrap by the door. It's a note from a clerk. It says, Successful redemption case. Continue observation. You didn't realize you were still being watched. You wonder who else is watching. The priest, the council, the man who gave you the chicken. You close the door, gently, and realize your freedom might depend on soup. Smiles. And staying boring. The next morning, you learn the chicken lays eggs. 2. In fact, she does it smugly, as if she knows she's now contributing more to the household than you. Your wife names her Beatrice. You try not to feel replaced. You step outside to draw water. The well smells faintly like regret and mildew. A neighbor waves at you, then points. Behind him, a teenager is holding a wooden sign that reads, Thief turned husband lives here. The ink is still wet, apparently, in your town. Public notice doesn't just mean informing the village. It also means mildly humiliating you every time someone walks by. The sign is part of your ongoing redemption narrative, which is a fancy way of saying, you're not in prison, but don't get too comfortable. Historians still argue whether this practice of labeling reformed criminals was genuinely about rehabilitation or simply a medieval hobby akin to gossip. But with woodcraft, you take down the sign. The boy puts up another. You chase him. He runs like someone who's definitely never stolen bread. Eventually. A clerk arrives from the city records. He wants to inspect your living arrangement. You open the door and gesture toward the tidy chaos inside. 1 chicken, 2 chairs, half a loaf of bread, and the vaguest hint of domestic cooperation. He nods, makes a note, sniffs your soup pot. Vegetables, he murmurs. Promising? You're now officially classified as low risk of recidivism. Congratulations. You've leveled up in the grand video game of not being executed. But the real trial arrives that night. Your wife's cousin drops by. He smells like onions and confidence. He also used to be a city guard. He eyes you like you're the world's most suspicious candle. I heard you married her, he says, smiling without his eyes. I did, you answer, trying not to blink too aggressively. She could have done worse, he adds. Like that guy who tried to marry his goat. You nod, unsure if that's meant as encouragement or a veiled threat. The evening descends into awkward stew and polite silences. Your wife says little. Her cousin says a lot. Mostly about how dangerous criminals are, and how his sword is mostly decorative now, but still sharp in a pinch. By the time he leaves, you've lost all feeling in your upper back and gained a new respect for emotional endurance. You think about your bed, thin mattress, lumpy blanket, probably haunted by old tax documents, but it's your bed. You lie awake, wondering how many people still think you're faking this marriage, wondering how many are just waiting for you to fail. Then, faintly, you hear laughter. Your wife, chuckling at something Beatrice has done. Apparently, the chicken is now sleeping in your seat. You smile in the dark. It's small. It's absurd, but it's a start. You roll over and think. You would never think surviving a death sentence would come down to poultry, soup, and strategic silence. But here we are. You wake up to the smell of cabbage and wood smoke. It's not romantic, but it's distinctly alive, which, considering your recent brush with execution, feels like a personal victory. You stretch, step around the chicken, and stub your toe on a misplaced bucket. Beatrice clucks judgmentally. Today, you're due for a civic contribution. As part of your community redemption package, a phrase that sounds suspiciously like corporate branding, you've been volunteered to assist with bridge repairs. Not build a bridge. Mind you, just carry stones from one end of the field to the other, while a carpenter yells instructions and never lifts anything heavier than his sarcasm. You trudge to the site, greeted by other unfortunate souls. One man tried to sell fake relics to pilgrims. Another was caught impersonating a priest. Together, you form a ragtag squad of It Was Just One Time Club. A civic warden watches from a stool, sipping ale. Good form. He says every time you lift a rock. You try not to respond with "I used to steal for a living," not cross-train. Historians still argue whether these labor assignments genuinely helped reintegrate criminals or just provided free muscle for infrastructure projects no one else wanted to do. Either way, the bridge is getting rebuilt, one rock and sore back at a time. During the lunch break, a child approaches you. She's maybe 6, missing a front tooth, and holding a slightly bruised apple. "Are you the man who married to not die?" she asks, with the bluntness only children possess. You nod slowly. She hands you the apple. "My grandma says that's clever." You take it like it's gold. Because in that moment, it is. Back home, your wife is sewing. Not your clothes. Those are still beyond hope. But something new. A curtain. For privacy. For something resembling dignity. You help hang it. Awkwardly poking a finger, with a splinter in the process. She laughs. Genuinely this time. Beatrice flutters by, triumphant with another egg. That night, The two of you sit in silence. Not awkward this time, just tired, in the way people are when they've both worked all day without collapsing. Your wife finally speaks. You were almost hanged. You nod. I was almost a lot of things. She glances over. You're not a monster. You don't answer. But you do notice that she no longer moves her things away from your side of the table. That small shift feels bigger than any bridge you just helped build. In the distance, church bells ring. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, just the usual reminder that time, like judgment, is always ticking. You think about your new role, not prisoner, not husband in any romantic sense, but something stranger, a symbol of justice gone oddly domestic, a case study in marital rehabilitation. You lean back and think, you would never think love would enter through the kitchen door, followed by a chicken and a curtain. But here we are. You wake up to quiet. No gallows, no glares, no immediate chores demanding your resurrection. Just the sound of wind nudging the shutters and Beatrice softly clucking in her sleep, which is somehow more dignified than your own snoring. The honeymoon period, if one could call it that, has entered a curious phase. You and your wife have stopped tiptoeing and started coexisting. She doesn't flinch when you enter the room anymore. And you've stopped mentally rehearsing escape plans involving the firewood pile and a tunnel that doesn't exist. This morning, she asks if you'll fetch water. You would never think that being sent to collect water could feel like a gesture of trust. But here we are. The bucket's cracked. The well is half a mile away, and your boots still smell like week-old soup. But you carry the bucket anyway. And she doesn't check it when you return. That feels oddly romantic. Overheard gossip in the village square makes you pause. Apparently. Another man tried the marriage gambit last week. Unlike you. He failed to convince anyone he was worth the rope or the vow. He's now scrubbing chamber pots at the monastery. You silently toast your survival with stale bread. Historians still argue whether marriage as a legal loophole was a relic of mercy, a manipulation of canon law, or simply a bureaucratic oddity with an unusually high risk of emotional fallout. Either way, you're living proof that love, or at least domestic neutrality, might be more rehabilitating than punishment. Later, a magistrate visits. His robes are less pristine than before, as if dealing with you has aged him. He asks routine questions. Are you working? Yes. I moved approximately 400 rocks last Thursday. Is the marriage stable? She only throws spoons now, not knives. Any intention to flee? You glance toward Beatrice. She'd follow me. Then she bites. He notes something down and leaves with the expression of a man who just had to inspect a goat for moral fiber. One quirky tidbit emerges that evening. As you help salt fish in the back room, your wife, without looking up, mutters, "You snore like my uncle." You freeze. "Is that bad, you ask?" "He lived to 80, she replies, mostly by scaring away bears. Progress. You'd count that as progress. Dinner is salted fish and lentils. You eat in companionable silence, interrupted only when Beatrice steals a piece of fish, flutters to the rafters, and drops it on your head. She is, evidently, not on board with peace talks. That night, you sit outside, watching stars through the holes in the thatched roof. You think about your strange new life. Not quite punished, not quite forgiven, just adjusted. You wonder if this is what freedom tastes like: dry lentils, shared silence, and the possibility that you're no longer simply surviving your sentence, but inhabiting it. You lie down, letting the sounds of the night fold over you like a moth-bitten blanket. And for once, you fall asleep without rehearsing your next defense. You wake up thinking someone is choking you. Turns out, it's just Beatrice sitting on your chest again, a feather to the mouth, and 2 talons pressing on your ribcage, her loving way of saying rise and shine. She's no rooster, but she's punctual. By now, you've settled into something resembling a routine. You chop wood badly, you fetch water slowly, you occasionally help mend nets. And once a week, you try to scrub your tunic until the stains become part of its aesthetic. Domestic life is basically a sequence of awkward gestures softened by the passage of time and fish scales. You and Beatrice's owner, sorry, your wife, are still married in the legal sense. Emotionally, it's a more flexible arrangement. You speak more now. Mostly short phrases like, "It's boiling over. That's my boot." And no, I'm not running away, I'm just weeding. One mainstream historical fact. In 13th century Italian communes, local courts often allowed clerics and minor nobles to issue alternative sentences in minor or ambiguous cases. Marrying the victim, or their sibling, or even the baker's daughter, if sufficiently dramatic, could satisfy a sense of restitution in communities where formal prisons were expensive, rare, and often unhygienic enough to be death sentences on their own. This morning, Beatrice's owner/wife hands you a spoon. Not to eat, to stir. She's making onion soup and doesn't trust the fire. You stir dutifully while she skins something that may once have been a rabbit, or a very confused cat. In the corner of the room is a carved chest you've never opened. It sits there like a mystery box in a medieval escape room. She notices your glance and says, "It was my mother's." And just like that, you realize you know almost nothing about this woman you married to avoid the hangman. Not her mother's name, not her favorite food, not even whether she actually believes in God or just fears her local priest's eyebrows. One quirky tidbit: some 13th century marriage records in Florence show ceremonies performed over prison bars. Yes, truly men in shackles saying "I do" to women in veils, with guards acting as witnesses and birds occasionally pooping on the officiant. Historians still argue whether these kinds of marriages were rooted in genuine community rehabilitation strategies, gender power balances, or simply chaotic convenience. You're inclined to vote for chaotic convenience, with a side of "nobody thought this through." Later, she brings you a blanket. Not a new one, just the one she normally uses. But she drapes it over your shoulders while you're sitting outside, staring at the moon like it owes you an explanation. No words, just the blanket, and a pause that doesn't need commentary. You want to say something profound, like, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry for stealing your spoon that first night." But you just nod. She nods back. That night, as you lie beneath patchy wool in Beatrice's judgmental gaze, it occurs to you that the rope you once feared has been replaced by threads, soft, fragile, and occasionally itchy, but still holding something together. You sleep more easily now. Not because the straw's gotten softer, it hasn't, but because you've stopped bracing for the ceiling to collapse or the law to change its mind. Fear has become a background hum, like the sound of Beatrice pecking wood in her sleep. This morning, you don't wake up to her claws. You wake up to the smell of warm bread. Your wife, still your wife, somehow has baked for the first time since the wedding. She doesn't say anything about it, just slices off a chunk, hands it to you, and resumes sweeping. You don't say anything either, but you eat every crumb. One mainstream fact in 13th century Italy: bread wasn't just food, it was survival, politics, and proof of stability. Bakers were respected members of society, and being offered bread in the home, especially handmade and warm, was a quiet gesture of trust, a miniature peace treaty in crust form. You head into town to deliver dried herbs. On the way, someone you recognize from your former life spots you. They hesitate, then call out. Married life suits you. You raise the herb basket and salute, trying not to look like someone who once nearly choked on fear. Inside the market, A man is arguing with a magistrate. He wants his brother freed on a marriage plea. The magistrate, a different one than yours, simply says, "We're not doing that anymore." You feel it like a drop stone in your stomach. The loophole, it seems, has closed. Historians still argue whether this kind of legal leniency empowered communities or simply gave too much discretion to men in robes with bad tempers and unwashed hands. Either way, you slip through at the last possible moment. By the time you return, Beatrice has dragged your pillow into the firewood pile. Again, your wife just shrugs. You both laugh. One quirky tidbit: some later legal codes in Italian city-states specifically forbade marriage to evade corporal punishment, which means, of course, it had become a trend. Apparently, medieval law wasn't immune to social fads. That night, you sit on the step, chewing old cheese and listening to frogs announce their existence to the moon. You think about rope and choices and the astonishing weirdness of being alive because someone once said "I do" while glaring at you. The house is quiet. The stars blur. And you think, absurdly, that you wouldn't trade this life for anything, not even your old one, not even freedom. Not because you've fallen in love, not quite, but because survival, over time, becomes something you carry gently, like a cracked jug of water, like a chicken that insists on sleeping on your chest. And so you lie back, arms folded behind your head, and let the evening drift around you like a shawl. No alarms, no sentences, no dramatic conclusions, just the ordinary miracle of being spared, and the quiet certainty that, for once, you won't need to run in your sleep.